On the third night before her wedding, Leora sat staring at a glossy document slid across the mahogany table. The voices of her future in-laws echoed in her ears. "Sign this, or there will be no wedding." The word prenup was printed in bold at the top, and her hands trembled. Little did they know, she wasn't the naive bride they thought she was. Hidden behind her calm smile was a secret worth $79 million, and a lawyer who had been waiting for this exact moment. Leora was the kind of woman everyone admired. She had a gentle smile, a calm voice, and a way of making people feel safe around her. When she walked into a room, even the air felt lighter. To Daxon, she was not just a fiancée. She was the woman who had brought laughter and peace into his once troubled life. Friends often said he had changed for the better since meeting her. He became softer, kinder, and happier, all because of Leora's love. To the outside world, they looked like the perfect couple, two people truly in love and ready to build a beautiful future together. But not everyone believed in that picture. Behind polite smiles and expensive clothes, Daxon's parents watched Leora with suspicious eyes. They never said it out loud, but deep inside they doubted her. They whispered among themselves that no woman could love their son without wanting something in return. To them, Leora's kindness was a mask, and behind it was greed. They thought she was after their fortune, after the wealth and comfort that came with being part of their family. Every time Leora laughed with Daxon, his parents wondered if it was genuine or just an act. Every time she planned the wedding with joy, they told themselves she was only excited about the luxury she would gain. While others praised Leora as the perfect bride, Daxon's parents saw only a danger to their family's money. They could not accept that their son had found love with a woman who had no interest in their riches. In their minds, Leora was nothing more than a gold digger wearing a sweet smile. Leora, however, had no idea how deeply they doubted her. She moved with sincerity, believing her love was enough to win their hearts. She thought she was being welcomed as a daughter, not knowing that every word she spoke and every step she took was being measured against silent suspicion. To the world, she was the bride everyone wished to be. But to the people who mattered most to Daxon, she was a threat to be tested, and eventually to be broken. The wedding was only 3 days away, and everyone expected the evening to be filled with laughter, stories, and family warmth. Leora had dressed carefully for the dinner, hoping to spend time with the people she was about to call her new family. She imagined kindness, maybe even a little bonding before the big day. But as she sat at the long dining table, something felt different. The smiles were stiff, the atmosphere too heavy, and Daxon's parents kept exchanging quiet glances that made her uneasy. When the last plate was cleared away, Daxon's mother suddenly reached into her handbag. Without a word at first, she pulled out a folder and slid it across the polished table. The sound of the papers brushing against the wood seemed louder than anything else in the room. Leora looked down and saw one word printed boldly at the top: prenup. Her chest tightened. Then came the voice, sharp and cold. "If you truly love our son, prove it by signing." The words did not come as a question, but as a command. Daxon's father leaned back in his chair, his eyes fixed on her, waiting to see her reaction. Daxon himself sat frozen, his hand twitching near his glass, but he said nothing. The silence that followed was unbearable. The room, once filled with the clinking of silverware and soft conversation, now felt like a courtroom where Leora was on trial. She could hear her heartbeat, heavy and uneven, as all eyes pressed down on her. She knew this was not about love. It was about doubt, about distrust that had been hidden until now. For a moment, her throat went dry, and her fingers trembled under the table. She wanted to ask why, to remind them she had given nothing but her heart to their son. But their faces showed no softness, only suspicion wrapped in authority. To them, love was not enough. They wanted proof, written in ink, sealed with her name. That night, the perfect image of family she had tried to hold on to shattered. Leora realized she was not sitting at a dinner table, but at a test designed to strip her of dignity and question the very love she had believed was pure. The demand hung in the air like ice, cutting deep into her heart, and the silence that followed carried more weight than any words ever could. Leora's eyes lingered on the prenup, but what hurt her most was not the paper in front of her. It was the look in Daxon's eyes. He wasn't surprised. His hands shifted uneasily, his eyes darted away, and his lips pressed tightly as if he already knew this moment was coming. That was when the truth hit her. Daxon had known all along. He had allowed his parents to plan this, to spring it on her like a trap. The man she trusted, the man she was ready to marry, had stayed silent. Her heart felt like it was breaking into pieces. This was not just about the prenup. It was about betrayal. Before vows were even spoken, before rings were exchanged, the trust between them was already wounded. The foundation of their love, which she had believed was built on honesty, suddenly felt shaky. She had pictured Daxon standing by her side, protecting her from anything that threatened their bond. Instead, he sat frozen, avoiding her gaze, while his parents pushed her into humiliation. A wave of sadness rushed over her, but she didn't let it show. Her face remained calm, her hands steady on the table, even though inside she was shaking. She wanted to scream, to ask him why he didn't defend her, why he chose silence over love. But Leora was not a woman who fought with loud words or tears. She understood something greater in that moment, that silence could be her strongest weapon. So she masked her pain behind a faint smile. She acted as if the betrayal hadn't pierced her heart, as if the demand hadn't cut through her dreams of a pure marriage. She looked at Daxon's parents with quiet eyes, and even at him with a softness he didn't deserve in that moment. What they could not see was that inside her mind, a strategy was already forming. Leora refused to let anger control her. She refused to give them the satisfaction of seeing her break. If they wanted proof of her strength, she would give it to them, but not in the way they expected. She decided then that this game they started would not end the way they thought. They believed they held power over her, but Leora silently promised herself she would be the one to write the ending. And for that, she would need patience, composure, and the mask of calm she wore so well. What no one at that table knew was that Leora was not as simple as they thought. Long before the wedding was even planned, she had already prepared for moments like this. Her late father had left her more than memories. He had left her land, businesses, and investments that she carefully grew into something much bigger. With quiet determination, she built her own empire piece by piece, turning his estate into a fortune worth $79 million. But she never flaunted it, never spoke about it, because she wanted to be loved for who she was, not for the weight of her wealth. Her strongest ally through it all was Amadi, her trusted lawyer. While others saw her as just a graceful young woman in love, Amadi knew the truth of her strength and independence. He had guided her in silence, drawing up documents, securing trusts, and protecting every dollar under her name. Everything was hidden in plain sight, properties no one connected to her, companies running smoothly without her face attached, and accounts so well protected that not even Daxon's powerful family could touch them. To outsiders, Leora looked like a woman about to marry into money, but in reality, she was the one who carried more wealth than they could imagine. That prenup her future in-laws had so proudly placed before her was not the weapon they believed it to be. It was a test, yes, but one that would backfire. The moment she picked up the pen, she knew the game had already shifted. Because Leora had built everything in her name, untouched by Daxon or his family, signing that document meant nothing to her. It took nothing from her and gave them no control. They thought they had cornered her, but in truth, they had only revealed their mistrust and smallness. She saw it clearly now. The real trap wasn't hers, it was theirs. They had underestimated her, treated her like a weak woman clinging to their fortune, when all along she had been protecting something far greater. Amadi, always in the background, had prepared for this exact night. While Daxon's family celebrated their so-called victory, he waited with the paperwork that could turn everything upside down. The shadow they thought was behind them was actually ahead, leading Leora to the moment where she would show them who truly held the power. All eyes were fixed on Leora as the prenup lay before her. Daxon's mother leaned back with folded arms, certain she had cornered the young bride. Daxon's father looked smug, as though victory was already theirs. Even Daxon himself sat tense, avoiding her eyes, as if silently begging her to comply. The room was so heavy that every second felt stretched. Leora looked at the pen resting beside the papers. To anyone watching, it seemed like the weight of her future was tied to that ink. Without a single word, she reached for it. Her hands did not shake, her face showed no fear. Calmly, she bent forward and signed her name at the bottom of the page. The silence in the room deepened. For a moment no one breathed. Then she placed the pen down. gently and slid the document back across the table. The ink was still fresh, yet her heart was steady, as though she had just closed the final chapter of a test she had already passed. Daxon's mother exchanged a triumphant glance with his father. Their lips curled into proud smiles, the kind that came from believing they had protected everything they held dear. They thought they had trapped her, thought they had proven their point. Daxon sat with relief washing over him, thinking the storm had ended. To them, this was the end of the conflict. Leora had bowed to their demands, and in their minds she had surrendered. But what none of them knew was that this silent act of obedience was not surrender. It was strategy. Every stroke of her pen was empty of risk, because everything that mattered had already been safeguarded. Her fortune, her empire, her inheritance, all had been tucked away months ago under Amadi's careful hands. She had signed away nothing, because there was nothing of hers to give. Far from the table, Amadi, her lawyer, waited patiently. In his briefcase were documents that carried more power than the prenup ever could. While Daxon's family celebrated their false victory, Amadi knew the truth, that Leora had turned their trap into her stage. When the time came, his papers would not just protect her. They would expose the weakness of those who thought they were strong. The room that believed it had silenced her was mistaken. Leora's silence was not weakness. It was the calm before a storm they could never see coming. A storm already prepared to turn their pride into their downfall. The days leading up to the wedding were filled with whispers. Friends and relatives noticed how Leora remained quiet after the prenup was signed. Some thought she was heartbroken. Others thought she had simply accepted her fate. But Daxon's parents carried themselves with pride, telling anyone who cared to listen that they had acted wisely. They boasted of how they had protected their son's fortune, how no woman would ever take advantage of him. In their eyes, they had won, and their smug smiles grew wider each day. The morning of the wedding came with excitement in the air. Guests were arriving, flowers were being arranged, and music filled the venue. But while everyone prepared for celebration, a storm was quietly building. Just as Daxon's parents were dressing for the grand occasion, a knock came at the door. A courier handed them an envelope sealed with authority. Inside was a legal notice, stamped and official. Their faces drained as they read the words. Their accounts and assets were frozen, effective immediately. Panic swept through the house like fire. The money they had flaunted, the businesses they controlled, the properties they proudly spoke of, all suddenly out of reach. Daxon's mother clutched the paper in disbelief, while his father shouted for explanations that no one could give. Servants exchanged nervous glances, sensing that something had gone terribly wrong. Their world, which had always felt so secure, was suddenly shaking beneath them. As news of the freeze spread, whispers turned into louder murmurs. Guests arriving at the wedding venue noticed the tension. Rumors traveled fast. How could such powerful people face such humiliation on the very day their son was to be married? The pride they had carried so openly was now collapsing in front of watching eyes. Leora, meanwhile, remained calm. She moved gracefully through the morning, her face serene, as if nothing unusual had happened. But inside she knew this was the beginning of the truth surfacing. The trap they thought they had set for her had quietly turned against them. While they had been busy boasting about protecting their son's fortune, they never realized their own was already slipping away. The wedding day that was supposed to mark their greatest victory had now become the stage for their greatest downfall. And the storm was only beginning. The chaos of the frozen accounts spread like wildfire. Guests at the wedding whispered, reporters circled, and Daxon's parents struggled to keep their composure. They tried to smile, but their hands shook, their eyes darted, and everyone could sense something was terribly wrong. That was when Amadi, Leora's lawyer, finally stepped into the light. Calm and steady, he held the documents that would change everything. He spoke with quiet authority, explaining what had been hidden all along. Leora had never needed Daxon's wealth. Long before the prenup, long before the wedding was even set, she had built her life in silence. Piece by piece, she turned her late father's estate into something powerful. Trusts that could not be touched, businesses that ran smoothly under her guidance, and investments hidden behind walls stronger than gold. Everything she owned was protected, and everything she owned carried one name, hers. The number stunned everyone. $79 million. That was the size of the empire she had quietly created, an empire no one had seen coming. Daxon's parents, who once mocked her as a woman seeking fortune, now stood frozen in shame. Their trap had not only failed, it had exposed their arrogance. While they were busy guarding their son's inheritance, Leora had been guarding an empire far greater than theirs. Gasps filled the air as the truth spread through the crowd. Friends, family, and even strangers turned their eyes toward her, not with pity, but with admiration. She was no longer just the graceful bride people thought they knew. She was a woman of power, a woman who had played her cards with wisdom and patience. Amadi laid the final documents on the table, proof that not a single cent of her fortune could be claimed by Daxon or his family. Every asset, every holding, every dollar remained under her control. The prenup they had pushed so proudly meant nothing in the face of her careful planning. For the first time, Daxon looked at her differently. He realized he had never truly understood the depth of the woman he was about to marry. She had trusted him with her heart, but never with her security, and now he understood why. The silence she had carried, the calm smile she had worn, had all been part of a strength far greater than he imagined. In that moment, the balance of power shifted completely. The family that once believed they held control was stripped of it, while Leora stood tall, untouchable, her worth shining brighter than ever before. The revelation hit Daxon's parents like a blow they could not recover from. Only hours before, they had stood tall, proudly speaking of how they had protected their son from a woman they believed was after his wealth. But now, with the truth spread across the wedding hall, their pride collapsed. They were no longer the powerful figures commanding respect. They were parents who had misjudged, humiliated, and insulted the very woman who had more power and dignity than they ever imagined. Their friends, once eager to sit by their side and enjoy their influence, began to whisper behind their backs. The same guests who had clapped at their speeches were now shaking their heads in disbelief. Every conversation at the wedding seemed to carry their names, not in admiration but in shame. Journalists who had been invited to cover the lavish wedding sensed a scandal and circled like hawks. Cameras flashed, questions were asked, and soon the story of their arrogance was no longer private. It was news for the world to see. Daxon's mother, who had been so quick to slide the prenup across the table, now avoided eye contact. Her hands trembled as she clutched her pearls, realizing she had underestimated a woman whose quiet grace masked unimaginable strength. Daxon's father, once so stern and proud, found his voice reduced to silence. He had spent years building his image as a man of wisdom and authority, yet in a single day, that image shattered. No one saw him as wise anymore. They saw him as blind, as a man who had allowed pride to turn into humiliation. Meanwhile, Leora stood in the very center of the storm, untouched by the shame surrounding them. Instead of pity, people looked at her with admiration. She had carried herself with dignity through betrayal and suspicion, and now she shone brighter than ever. Women admired her courage, men respected her intelligence, and the younger guests whispered that she was the kind of woman they wished to be or to marry. The family that had tried to strip her of dignity had only stripped themselves. Their reputation, carefully polished for years, was now in ruins. The whispers grew louder, and the more they tried to hide their faces, the more attention they drew. The title of protectors of wealth was gone. In its place stood the truth, that they had been cruel, small-minded, and wrong. And as the world turned its eyes toward Leora with respect, Daxon's parents felt the crushing weight of shame. Their pride, once their strongest weapon, had become the very reason for their downfall. Daxon watched everything crumble around him. His parents' pride, their reputation, their carefully built image. But what hurt him most was the way Leora stood tall, graceful and unshaken, while he sat powerless. He loved her deeply, but he could not forget the moment at the dinner table when the prenup was slid across to her. He had sat there, silent, watching her face break while he said nothing. That silence now weighed heavier than any words he could have spoken. He stepped closer to her, his voice low, almost desperate. He begged for her forgiveness, telling her that he had been caught between his love for her and his loyalty to his parents. He admitted he had been weak, that he had chosen silence when he should have defended her. His eyes were filled with regret as he promised to stand by her now, to protect her no matter what it cost him. But Leora's heart was torn. She listened, her expression calm, but inside, she felt the pain of betrayal like a wound that would not heal. She had loved him with all her heart, trusted him completely, And yet when the moment came for him to show his love, he had chosen silence. That silence had been louder than any words. A silence that told her she could not depend on him when it mattered most. She looked at him, remembering the nights they had laughed together, the promises they had whispered, the dreams they had built. Part of her longed to believe him, to hold on to the love they had shared. But another part of her, the part that had been scarred by his betrayal, could not ignore the truth. Love without trust was fragile, and trust once broken was not easily mended. Daxon held her hand, pleading, saying he would spend the rest of his life proving his love. But Leora's heart no longer felt safe in his. She saw the man she had wanted to marry, but she also saw the man who had chosen his parents' pride over her dignity. Her silence now was not weakness, it was clarity. In that moment, she realized she faced a choice of her own. To forgive him and risk carrying the weight of his silence forever, or to let go and choose herself. And though her heart still cared for him, she knew love built on betrayal could never feel the same again. The wedding hall was filled with anticipation as Leora walked slowly toward the altar. Guests leaned forward, waiting to see the moment when the bride and groom would join their lives together. Daxon stood there, his eyes fixed on her, hope flickering in his heart that she would still choose him despite everything. His parents sat stiffly in their seats, humiliated by the storm of shame but still desperate for the ceremony to continue, hoping marriage would mend what pride had broken. Leora's gown shimmered under the lights, but it was not the dress that caught everyone's attention. It was her calmness. She walked with quiet dignity, every step steady, every movement sure. Inside her, the battle was over. She had already made her decision. She had faced betrayal, humiliation, and doubt, yet she had come through stronger than before. And now, standing before the man she once dreamed of marrying, she carried only truth in her heart. The priest spoke the traditional words, inviting them to declare their vows. Daxon's voice shook as he promised to love and protect her forever, his eyes begging for another chance. When it was Leora's turn, she held his gaze. Her lips curved into the faintest smile, not of joy, but of strength. She did not shout. She did not expose him or his parents to more shame. Instead, she leaned closer, her voice barely above a whisper, yet powerful enough to cut through the air. "You wanted me to prove my love," she said softly. "Instead, I proved my worth." The words pierced deeper than anger ever could. Daxon's heart sank as he realized that this was not a vow. It was goodbye. Leora stepped back, lifted her gown with grace, and turned from the altar. The crowd gasped as she walked down the aisle alone, her head high, her freedom glowing brighter than any jewel she could wear. Every step she took was a declaration that her dignity was worth more than a marriage built on lies and silence. Guests whispered, some in shock, others in admiration. What was supposed to be a union had become a lesson, a moment that none would ever forget. Leora did not leave as a bride without a groom. She left as a woman who chose herself. Her freedom, her strength, and her worth were greater than any promise made in distrust. And as the doors closed behind her, everyone knew she had walked into a future brighter than the one she had been offered at that altar.